think it's time to do that again. Will the ushers please come down the aisles and pass out bread? And they're going to give a little chunk of bread to everybody on the aisle seat. And if you'll take that and pass it down, and everybody take a piece of bread. We're going to give a little chunk of bread, something that you can hold in your hand and think about as we talk about what bread really means. And we'll give Miss Corey and the young folks a minute to go to their chapel. I like the way this young man holds up the Bible.
Hey, raise it high.
That's very good. Thank you, ushers. If we run a little short, we've got a little bit more we can bring out. Now, if you're gluten sensitive, don't touch. Just watch your neighbor and think along with us as we talk about this. Don't get next to anybody with bread if you're gluten sensitive.
No, we had a request for peanut butter.
Oh, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, okay? Okay, now for those who have some bread in your hands, I'd like to ask you to do this. Close your eyes for just a second and break that bread again in front of your nose and smell that fresh baked bread smell. Just for a second. Take a deep breath of that bread. And think for a minute about what memories that smell calls up to you. What does it say to you? What's it talking to you about? Is it maybe a family meal that you had that was important? Is it a dinner with friends? Is it something way back in your childhood where someone was baking something in the kitchen? Something important? Now, after a couple of minutes of this memory, I want you to open your eyes, please, and look at our altar and our altar rail and think about why Jesus so often used the symbol of bread in his teaching. Because we've been talking about bread for a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about it some more as we go forth. Can you see a vision of the communal meal in your memory and then see any resemblance to what you experience here at this altar compared to the communal meal with a family? Most of us can do that, and I want you to associate that smell while we talk today about a wonderful meal that has been shared with others. A wonderful meal that you experience here with Jesus and with your neighbors with whom you are, as it says in the prayer book, in love and charity. Now, it's okay to go ahead and eat the bread if you like. I'm sorry I don't have jam or peanut butter or warm melted butter or anything to go with it. Just small bits, no choking, please. And if we gather up several dozen baskets of pieces at the end of this, then I'm going to have to really modify this sermon. So we don't want to go there. But what I want us to consider is what breaking bread really means to us as a Christian community. We share Holy Communion as a community of the faithful. We have been talking about this faith and this bread for a few weeks now. We talk about being faithful to God, faithful to Jesus. We are full of faith when we come up to this altar rail and we share bread and wine. But we're not perfect. Some of us may have doubts. Some of us may not be so full of love. Some of us may be having an especially hard week. But we all come here hoping to be renewed, hoping to be somehow made whole, hoping somehow to embrace our faith, whether we feel it at that moment or not. Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God and also believe in me." He symbolized himself as bread for a very good reason. It was the most common food of the time. People believed in bread. They believed in its power to give life. And many came to believe that Jesus granted the power of life as well. Sometimes it's not all that easy to believe. But if Jesus is going to go before us to prepare a place for us, will there not be bread to break in our home with him? However that takes form, I'm certain that that will be there. For we are a people of the breaking of bread. In its literal sense, breaking bread means just what it says. For thousands of years, bread was the staple of human diet. And you literally started a meal by breaking off pieces of bread to feed your family and guests. Breaking bread with someone is sitting down with them to peacefully share a meal. That's one thing to remember about breaking bread and communions of all kinds. In the real world, breaking bread together is an act of sharing in peace. Because if you're breaking bread, you're not breaking heads. One generally invites one's friends to dinner. We're very particular about the people with whom we break bread. We may not, for instance, accept a dinner invitation from someone we don't care for. The act of taking food into our bodies has become so personal that we really only want to do it with people that we're very comfortable with. So generally, eating with another person is a way of saying, I'm with you. I like you. We form a community together. And that's the main form of any communion. But as Christians, we are called into communion, remember, with all people, everywhere in the world. They are all our neighbors. We are with all of them. That's the communion with all people as Christians we strive for. We act out that communion every Sunday together. We become one people. We become the people of God. The people brought together by Jesus. Bread is called the staff of life because it's an incredibly basic food that supports life. The world of bread is immense and varied, and some type of bread is found almost everywhere in the world. And so we're all tied together by our humanity and by the bread we eat. Bread is more than just food. Just think of how the word's used. A person's bread and butter, for instance, is his or her main source of income. When people break bread, they share more than just a meal. They come together in body as well as spirit. It's not surprising that bread is loaded with special meaning. Since the first raised breads were baked in Egypt about 4000 BC, nearly 6,000 years ago, bread has been a vital food source for all people around the globe. Over the centuries, it's traveled, it's evolved, and it reflects both the unity and the diversity of human culture and the ability of people to adapt to their environment. Now, the Israelites know all about God giving them their daily bread, as Father Scott told us last week. It came to them in the form of manna as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus liked to remind us of that heavenly bread. It was for the Jews their daily bread, a gift from God, and it sustained them in life in every way. For 40 years they lived on that. I don't doubt that they ate it in as many ways as Bubba told Forrest Gump of the ways to fix shrimp. Boiled and fried and baked and raw and steamed and grilled and braised. picture. It was so important to them and so holy that the Israelites kept jars of it right by the tablets of the law as a reminder of their dependence on God for their very lives. So as not to speculate too much about this bread from heaven, we should ask ourselves, what's more important, the bread itself, our daily food, or the one who sends it to us? What comes from God we should not be too picky about, as the Israelites were from time to time, or we're going to end up being hungry a lot. If you're willing to look at everything that comes to you as coming from God, then there'll be no end of blessings that you will give thanks for, and no end of what you can share in the breaking of bread. Day by day, we are sustained by the simple gifts from God that make our lives abundant. As we recognize that, the bread, the breath, the love, the wine, we begin to realize that all the rest is like gravy. It's seasoning. It's an overflow. An overflow of food so great that our pantries can't hold it all. We are called as Christians to share those gifts, those blessings that we have, that abundance with others, as we do here at St. Martin's so beautifully. We break the bread so that we share our love and our community. Now, my mother taught me from an early age to never pick up a piece of bread at a table without breaking it before I put it in my mouth. That's a wonderful old Southern tradition. But so much later in life, I understand that what she meant it was as a sign that it wasn't all mine. It was meant to be offered to others. Whether she put that into words or not, it was our symbol of hospitality as a family. Even though my hard little boy heart had no intention of sharing that bread. I'll tell you another interesting thing. That thought, I talked to some folks after one of our last services together. And Mother Susan came up to me and said, you know, I want to tell you what went through my mind as I was smelling that bread. She said, when I was a little girl, I loved to bake bread for my family. And she said, I didn't get a chance to do that very often, but when I did, I insisted that I get to serve it to them, to pass it around and make sure everybody had some. She said, do you think that has anything to do with why I became a priest? Now, I know that is an understanding of hospitality, a sign of humility, and a sign of thanksgiving all together when we share bread like that. Jesus fed the 5,000 with bread and a few fishes. And he so impressed the crowds that they thought of him as the Moses who had come to give them manna forever. They asked him to produce bread on the spot. They asked him to give them bread. But he knew they needed more than baked wheat. They needed another kind of bread. And so he gave them himself, his flesh. I am the bread of life, he told them. For he knew that they needed reminding that we live day by day because God provides. God provides not what we may want, but what we need. Some bread, some love, some wine, and a sense of community with each other as we break bread together. All brought to us by the ordinary man who came from heaven to bring life and broken bread to us all. So we invite you to share this breaking of bread in all of its meanings here at this altar. We acknowledge that the bread is a symbol of our Passover, that God has delivered us from sin and death. So together, we keep the feast of everlasting life. And by that action, we keep the faith. And we, meaning the priest who speaks on your behalf, invite you to take this bread and this wine in remembrance that Christ died for you. In this statement of invitation, remember one important thing. By this invitation, you are inviting each other to a common meal together. At this rail, you are feeding each other as God is feeding you.